Parliament, and I, for one, don't want to take any lectures in democracy from a dictatorship. It sounds rather absurd to me. There's, as we all know, effectively an end to border control between us and the EU member states. But that's not the end of it. The EU has other initiatives to increase immigration from outside the EU. For example, EU-Africa partnership. I think there's going to be an EU-India partnership. There's also the European Police Force. They operate outside national scrutiny and they have immunity from prosecution. Usually it's a principle of international law that you don't carry out law enforcement activities within a country without that country's permission. But of course, as far as I know, our government doesn't know what this police force are doing, and I reiterate, they have immunity from prosecution. So they could do anything to somebody and we'd have no recourse at all. There's, of course, an intention for a common defence policy and a rapid reaction force. Most of you know about the common external tariff. There's restrictions on whether or not we can provide state assistance, such as the post office, for example. So the post office has to carry out its public functions, which aren't particularly lucrative, such as the ordinary domestic mail, but when it comes to the commercial activities, it has to compete with other companies which only offer the more lucrative commercial services. And that, in my view, is the reason why the post offices are doing so badly. But of course, not only that, to add insult to injury, our government's power to help them is seriously hampered by the EU. Last, I'll end by talking about domestic regulation, and I reiterate, 80% of our economy is actually domestic. Most of you know about the Weights and Measures Act. I've given you there an example of a small butcher who was put out of business by an EC directive. He wanted to carry meat 100 yards between a butcher shop he owned and also a slaughterhouse. The authorities, acting on an EC directive, said, no, you can't do that. You've got to build an underground refrigerated tunnel, and also you've got to build shower facilities for lorry drivers, even though all his deliveries came from a farm 3 or 4 miles away. Consequently, he decided it was no longer worth carrying on with that particular business. If anybody can foresee some of these, if anybody can research a directive and you can show to somebody that it's going to decimate their particular business, I don't care what their ideology is, pure out of self-preservation, they'll either vote for us or at least they'll oppose the European Union at every opportunity. So that's the best way of, I think, furthering our cause. Be as informed as possible. If you can, any opportunity, without lecturing people, just recount succinct factual arguments in order to persuade people, because there's so much misinformation out there, we have to speak out. And if we don't speak out now, however bad things get, at least we have an opportunity to have these kinds of meetings. But without exaggerating, if we don't speak out now, you could be standing up to something a lot worse and a lot more unpleasant. Okay, I think I'd like to thank Mike and Rob for filming this. I think that concludes my lecture. But does anybody have any questions for me? Yeah, any questions?
This international law where you can be extradited to another country.
Yeah.
Would the sentence there be a lot more severe than in our own country?
Depends on the crime, not necessarily, but as I say, some things aren't even a crime in this country, like denying the Holocaust.
But if you wanted to take that to the European Court of Human Rights, would that other country allow that, or is it not to allow it?
Well, theoretically, every EU country is part of the is now effectively bound by the European Court of Human Rights and the European Convention. But it works in a very strange and counterintuitive way. So to give you an example, the butcher who was charged with selling bananas by the pound took his case to the European Court of Human Rights, and he failed. But yet you've got a drug dealer who's come here, and he got AIDS. Now, despite what he was, I'm sorry that he's got AIDS, but he came here to sell poison to our citizens. He's got a contagious disease. I would say he should go ipso facto. But no, the European Court of Human Rights said not only can he not be deported, you've got to support him and you've got to pay for his medical treatment for the rest of his life. So he wins his case, but Stephen Thorburn, the butcher who sold his bananas by the pound, lost his case. So it's quite a perverse court, really. I think the reason for that is they don't like liberty. What you need to understand the legal philosophy behind it. They decree what rights you have. And I think it's Article 54, under that article, all these rights can be taken away. We've got a common law. So it's not up to the state to say what you can do, it's up to the state to allow you as much liberty as is reasonably possible. And if they want to stop you from doing something, they need a good reason. But under this instrument, the state decrees the rights you have and the state takes them away. And if you just, like Steve Thorburn, say, I don't really want anything, I just want you to stay out of my business, you tend not to be successful. If you're asking for something like a benefit, or you're asking to be kept into a country where you haven't contributed anything, you tend to succeed. And there are lots of examples like that.
You mentioned a couple of reasons why some of our opponents would say the European Union is good, because we want peace and we want to have wars. Wouldn't you agree that the fact that we're a part of NATO and also the fact that we've got nuclear weapons has made sure that there's peace in Europe? And the French have got nuclear weapons. So it's in nobody's interest to have any wars now.
Well, exactly. We're a permanent member of the Security Council. We're a member of NATO. Those are the things that are genuinely designed to safeguard our national security. That was the pretext for the European Union. The true goal is just to essentially eviscerate the nation state and the very concept of nationhood. So no, I do agree with that.
Sorry. Why are so many politicians of all the main parties going along with this? Don't they know this? Don't they know these?
I think it's a combination. I think some of them know and they're just being deceptive. I think some of them are career politicians. They may be able to put their friends, for example, into the European Parliament or into the Commission, like Peter Mandelson. Unelectable, but he can be put in the Commission and earn 300 grand a year. Some of them, I think, are just ignorant. But I think
we've fought 2 world wars.
Yeah.
And we've given away.
It's shameful.
On the graves of all the soldiers and servicemen who died.
Well, we have.
In 1973, I think,
Yeah.
the European Union.
That the European Communities Act was passed in 72, but we were actually formally a member in 1973.
So we had the referendum in 1975.
We had it retrospectively. We'd already joined.
Yeah, we did have a referendum.
That's correct. Yeah.
Now, in that referendum, of course, Mrs. Thatcher campaigned for us to stay in the European Economic Union, as it was called. The opposition were allowed to put forward this case that we've been received.
Yes.
And they lost it, the referendum,
That's right.
quite substantially. Now, because it's been an incremental approach where the sovereignty has been gradually transferred to Brussels, people have not really rebelled against the whole process.
Yeah.
By not rebelling against it, by not voting for opponents, you've actually consented to this loss of sovereignty. And alongside that has come a loss of national feeling in this country, and even a loss of memory of national sovereignty. Now, what do you think is required to jolt the British people into rebellion and a desire to reclaim their national sovereignty?
The first thing is to explain to them specifically how the European Union is affecting them and to counter the lies that are being told. So as I've given you obviously examples where the politicians have claimed that they're making their own laws and they're just doing the European Union's bidding, but also to make, as you say, to restore a sense of nationhood, to make people realise they don't have to be servile. There's nothing wrong with the nation state. The nation state's what's made Europe such a great continent. That's what I think we really need to do.